And just recently I recall being asked yet again by a woman who was very sad and despondent. And she asked me whether is it possible that some of us are born with a sad gene, with a gene, a genetic makeup that makes us prone or disposes us a predisposition to sadness. And when I asked her, and I didn't answer, I just looked at her like with a little surprise. She said to me, "You can't imagine, Rabbi, how much weight I carry from all my miseries and anxieties." So it's true, maybe I can't imagine it, but there are people who really suffer in this lifetime and have experienced a disproportionate amount of difficulties and sadness. And as much as my heart goes out, you can't always identify with something unless you yourself experience. We can empathize with each other. So the question that she asked is a very appropriate question that many of us have, and that is, are some of us just more prone, or are some of us destined to be sad in this lifetime? So the question about the gene, about the sadness, about the challenges we have in our lives. And, it's hard to quantify, but look, if you're able to add up all the tears and all the sadness and misery of people throughout the world, how much would it weigh, so to speak? How big is that? How big of a load is it? It's almost impossible to imagine. Just to give you just to put it in context, even when we talk about one individual's pain, anyone who's gone through any difficult times knows it's extremely heavy, and can drive a person crazy. Just the intensity of how it consumes our minds and hearts, the fear or anxiety or other so-called negative feelings. And when you're in that state, you almost don't feel possible to ever get out of it. And when you're out of it, you can't even imagine that you'd ever get back into that type of situation. But anyone that has had a panic attack or any type of anxiety, I'm talking about even anxiety for reasons that are legitimate. I'm not talking about self-made demons, but actual ones. It's a very heavy burden, and very hard for others to understand it, because when you're not there, as I mentioned, it's hard to imagine that someone can be. You say, why don't you just snap out of it or something? But being that we all have been in situations, maybe some worse than others, it makes it somewhat easier to identify and empathize with someone in that situation, because you just have to imagine yourself in that situation. So when you are experiencing any type of sadness in that sense, obviously when you're in the throes of it, very difficult to just shine a light and say, there's another way to look at things, because the sheer emotion and it so overwhelms us, that it's difficult to see clearly. Well, let me say this. Let's analyze sadness, and we'll go back to the genetic aspect of it. You see, there are two ways to look at the psyche of a human being. And I'm going to compare two models here. One is, we'll use the prevalent secular psychological model of human beings. And the other model will be the Torah model, the Jewish model. Okay? And they're, as you see, very, very different. One model is driven, we'll call it by circumstantial and consequential and circumstantial factors. What do circumstantial factors mean? I'll coin it the Freudian Darwinian model. For example, bacteria. Is it possible that some bacteria are more joyful and others are sad? The answer is no. Because when it comes to nature, just like there aren't sad and happy trees, and there aren't sad and happy fish, nature works like a clock. So though different creatures may have personalities, but more or less they all fit into a certain predictable pattern. So if human beings are just evolved animals, then you can say the same thing as with ourselves. It's a circumstantial thing, meaning that we're wired a certain way, and you may be like, for example, there's certain animals that are very aggressive, and some animals that are very tame. There's certain animals that seem to be very playful. There's a debate that rages about dolphins, for example. Some see them very playful, and some see them as very aggressive. When they turn on you, they can be extremely, extremely aggressive. But regardless, there are definitely creatures that are more domesticated, are more pet-like, so to speak, and other animals can never be tamed. So these are almost hardwired personality types. Of course, within a family of animals, you'll find certain variations, but you won't find variation. For example, as I said, porpoises or dolphins, they all fit into the same category. Other animals, as I said, are much more aggressive, and they usually also fit in the same category. In other words, you're not going to find, for example, in the world of predators, take a leopard. Now, one leopard just simply doesn't hunt and one does. It doesn't work that way. They all hunt. Yes, there's maybe a difference between the male and female species, how they do it, and so on. So there's a certain, when I say circumstantial, meaning in this case it's like a pre-wired thing. If you apply that model to human beings, so then there's just each of us, to use the words of Darwin, survival of the fittest, whatever it takes for you to survive. So your genes will adapt, as Richard Dawkins put it, the selfish gene. Your genes will adapt to whatever keeps you surviving. If happiness keeps you surviving, happiness will be a dominant gene. If sadness keeps you to survive, sadness. For example, the panic syndrome, what they call the flight syndrome, that they say that many of our allergies or certain symptoms we have is because it's evolved from the time where we were living in the wild. So we have certain instincts to run, to fly because of danger. And therefore, we develop certain reactions to things. So in other words, survival is the driving force. Why did I call it circumstantial? Because then you can say it's based on circumstances. If you're living in a safe environment, it's probably better for the theory of survival of the fittest for you to get along with everyone around you. If you're living in a dangerous environment, it's probably better that you should be more vigilant and more critical and more negative because you need to protect yourself. So it's very circumstantial in that type of context. And this is a real working psychological model. I'm specifically spelling it out because it's critical. Whenever you discuss a topic like this, I always find that you can talk about it on a symptomatic level. Rab Shia says, Purim, nicht Tisha B'Av. You're sitting like... Can we get some chairs? We need some extra. There's plenty of chairs, no? You want to bring some chairs down, some guys? Oh. You can take chairs. No, I just feel uncomfortable that, huh? Not for you. I'm talking about, is he sitting on the floor? What's he sitting on? You don't know with Jews. They could be, they mix things, Like some people, you go in Rosh Hashanah, looks like Simchas Torah in the shul. And some places, Simchas Torah looks like Rosh Hashanah. You know how it goes, yeah? The Kabbalah shul, Rosh Hashanah looks like Simchas Torah. There's certain shuls that Simchas Torah looks like Yom Kippur or maybe even like Tisha B'Av. So this is a working model that actually impacts a lot of the psychological work in our times, therapists, psychiatry, psychology, what we expect of people, and it has infiltrated everyone here, all of us, because it's in the media, it's in television, it's between the lines, it's subliminal, it's overt, wherever you turn. It's an attitude, how you look at people. It's very much shaped by Freudian thought. Even the anti-Freudians still have to contend with Freud. And also by Darwinian thought, which is basically that we are certain type of pre-wired animals. Yes, we may have developed a brain that's larger than all the creatures in the world. We've become more ingenious and more innovative than any other animal. But still, there are certain instinctive elements and impulsive elements in the human being that drive you. So when it comes to things like happiness and sadness, it's not something that's really much in your control. It could be something that we are pre-wired and so on. The Torah model is a completely different model. It's not just a question about evolution versus creationism. It's a completely different model of the human being. That the Torah model says the human being was created in the divine image, which means Our only pre-wired element is that we have a divine personality. Yes, there's another part of us that's the dust of the earth. Like it says in the Bible, in the Genesis, it says he took the dust of the earth and imbued it with a breath of life. God did, and that became the human being. So clearly we have elements of ourselves, elements in our personality that are, you can say, animal-like, but we also have another side, which is called the soul. As soon as you add the soul into the equation, everything changes. Now, animals may also have souls, and they do have souls that keep them alive, but their souls don't have any independent power. They are what's called, just like there's an expression called that an animal also has intelligence, but it's called das hanikne. What does that mean? It means, to translate that? It's a habitual knowledge. Creatures are very ingenious. Creatures find all kinds of innovative ways to catch prey, to protect themselves, to protect their young. But it's all within a program. Even their ingenuity can be predicted, because they're wired that way. You don't find anything unpredictable that animals do, unless humans screw them up, basically. Like nature. You know that certain things will always be, and nature is brilliant. But it's brilliant within a program, and you could emulate it, you could predict it, and so on. It has laws. When it comes to the human being's soul, on the other hand, the soul of the human being has a certain independent nature, which means you can do something that's self-destructive. Animals will never do something self-destructive. Even if an animal gives its life for another animal, it's with a plan. But just self-destructive, just to do something that is harmful to itself, that's called insanity. Only humans can be insane like that. So humans, in a sense, what we see, and we attribute this to the soul, can go out of the program. Yes, you can predict that a human being will protect itself at all costs. But then human beings you see noble acts that people have given up their own life for the life of another, irrational or super-rational. And then the other way around, you've seen people who did damage to themselves and to others, and even to their own children, which no creature would ever do. Now, there are in the animal world, there are creatures that do hurt their own children, are capable of eating their own children. But that's very, very specific to particular species, and that's also predictable. It's not across the board. Human beings are capable of hurting their own children, for selfish reasons, out of ignorance, which is seemingly biological impossibility. How could you hurt your own offspring? It would seem that you would protect your offspring. That would be the natural reaction, but we see it all the time. We see abuse all the time. It doesn't make any sense. Now, as strange as it sounds, it's because the soul has a type of independence from our habits. We're able to go out of the computer program, so to speak, which no other creature in the world can do. Now, how the evolutionists explain this, I'm not an evolutionist, I don't have to explain it. They don't have an answer for this. Some of them, I've read this, some of them say the mind went out of control. That evolution is a quirk. Human beings should never have become human beings. We should have been sophisticated apes, but we became too smart for ourselves, and that's why we can hurt ourselves. That's what some evolutionary thinkers say, that we are a quirk, we are a mutation, actually. Now, if you watch The Matrix, the machine said that too. We are a germ, basically. So put too much brains in an animal, and animals can become extremely destructive. There are evolutionary thinkers that say this, but they say we can't change anything. What are you supposed to do with 6 billion people? Lobotomize everybody, except, of course, these evolutionist thinkers. So, and then there's different approaches to it. The bottom line is, from a Torah model, is a whole different attitude. There's a whole part of us that's not predestined, ever, because it's godlike. And just as God is not predestined, just as God is not programmed, so too is a part of us that's not programmed. And that can go in two directions. You can go out of the program and make it and make the world better than it would have been natural, or you can go out of the program and destroy the world. Just to illustrate this point, there's a Mishnah in the Talmud, in the Sanhedrin, that says that that when you save one life, it's like saving the universe. When you kill one life, it's like killing the entire universe. Because each human being is a microcosm of the entire world. And the proof of this comes from Adam and Eve. The the human being was created as an individual, not as a group. For example, all other creatures were created in a group. And the human being was created as an individual. The Mishnah goes on, why? Why was the human being created as one? Not like 20 people or 50 people or 2 people. It was one. Then God split it into male and female. And the Mishnah continues, a beautiful explanation, because to teach us that Chayav Adam Lemer, that every human being should say, B'shvili Nivra Elam, that the entire universe was created because of me. Not out of arrogance or self-centeredness, that it's only Aniva Afsed, me and nothing else. On the contrary, because of responsibility, that you should feel that you are responsible for the entire universe. And then it continues, so when a person hurts one person, it's as if they hurt the entire universe. And if they save a person, it's like they saved the entire universe. Now, in the same context there, the Mishnah goes on and asks the question, why was the human being created last? Created last. We're going to sell seats on the couch for extra cost, so from now on, so remember that. That's a good idea, right? Velva, you here? Amos is going to couch seats, like, first class. So the Mishnah continues, and in the same context, asks another question. So, if the human being is such a central point in creation, in the universe, why was the human created last? If you read the story of Genesis, you see that in day 1, light, God created light. Day 2, God separated the upper and lower heavens and waters. Day 3, vegetation. Day 4, the luminaries, Ma'iris Agdelim, the sun and the moon. Day 5, the animals. And day 6, the human being. If the human is the crown jewel of creation, God should have created the human being first. And the answer given is 2 answers are given, and they seem to contradict each other. One answer is given because when you invite a guest to a table, first you set the table and then you bring the guest. If you have a special guest, you don't sit the guest down at a table and then begin to bring a tablecloth and set the table. You set the whole table. In this case, God created the entire earth with all its creatures, with all its beauty, everything. The table is set, and now comes the crown jewel, the special guest, the human being, to elevate the entire world. The second answer given is the exact opposite. It's a very derogatory answer. It says that because if a human being sins, the Torah tells you, don't think you're so special. Because even Yitush, even a lowly insect, an insect was created before you. So it's to teach us humility. Why were we created last? In case you are corrupt or you misbehave, remember that you were created after even a lowly insect was created before you. So which one is it? Your special guest, crown jewel that comes after everything, or the last because even an insect is greater than we are? So the answer, obviously, if you think about it, lays right in the line there. Depends how we behave. Depends on us. If a human being lives up to the reason to being that guest, so then he's the greatest and the highest and elevates the entire universe. If a human being does something that's destructive, then even an insect is greater. Why is an insect greater? Because the insect never destroys. An insect only does what the program tells it to do. It's only the human that transcends, that can go, transgresses or transcends. So, therefore, it really is up to us. There's an expression, a Hasidic saying that says that when a cruel, wicked person walks on the street, the cobblestones cry out, "Who are you to walk on us?" We the stones never transgressed. We never did anything wicked. We never hurt anyone. What right do you have to walk with your feet on us, to tread on us? So, if you think about it, just as an example, you tear an apple off a tree. What right do we have to consume an apple? Apple was living peacefully on the tree. Just because we don't understand or relate, maybe the apple was part of a family of apples and they communicate and they have their own life, whether we understand it or not. What right do we have to just tear off something off a tree? Or for that matter, I say an apple, I'm just using as an example. Anything in nature. So vegetarians, for example, will make the argument about animals. I remember this very vividly. It was, what year was it? I just started teaching in Manhattan. It was like about 1992. Wow, that's a long time ago. 20 years ago, 19 years ago. And I remember this was the only act of prophecy I ever experienced, for the record. So I was giving this class, and before the class began, I remember two, three people came in. I saw one guy was particularly aggressive, and we don't know yet whether it's genetic or not, but he was aggressive. And I saw his body language and all that. And in those days, because it was a smaller group, and I used to often open up in the beginning if anyone has any questions. So yes, he had a question. And he wants to know how it is that the Jews, and especially religious Jews, they celebrate the killing of animals and slaughtering animals and eating meat on Shabbos and holidays and the offerings in the temple. You had a whole list of grievances on the aggression. So because I have a little experience, I said the following to him, and all hell broke loose. But this is what I said. I don't know why this came to me, but I said to him, "What do you think about a guy that is abusive to his spouse, but he's a vegetarian?" Little did I know at the time that he was both. He got livid. I remember his face got all like angry, and I saw right away I hit a certain point, a soft spot, and he was like, I don't remember what he said, but it was like he became basically almost violent. Let's put it this way. His friend quieted him down, and he said, "Why would you say such a thing?" And I didn't say it about him. I just said it hypothetically. What do you think about a guy like that? And then, of course, I went on to explain that's very interesting. So you're very sensitive to animals, but you're not sensitive to your own family members. What is that exactly about? Is it sensitivity or it's your own mishigas, The Nazis had very, very strict laws about how you treat pets, dogs and cats. And you could be prosecuted for mistreating an animal. And then look what they did to human beings. Far worse. Yeah. Right, exactly. So the question really is, as one Rebbe once said, and this is by no means an attack on vegetarianism, because actually Adam and Eve were vegetarians until the flood. Human beings were prohibited from killing an animal to eat. So vegetarianism is a Torah concept, but it all depends where it's coming from. Is it your own cause and crusade, or is it a divine thing? And I'll explain what I mean. So this is what I said then at that class, and I said that, why is it, for example, we're sensitive to the killing of an animal, which is very, very compassionate and admirable, but what about the killing of a vegetable or a mineral? So, of course, immediately we say, what do you mean? Animal sheds blood. But how do we know? What do you know what's going on in the mineral and vegetable world? And actually, later I found that that in Russia there was a vegetarian sitting at a Shabbos table, and he didn't want to eat the meat. So the Rebbe whispered to his son, he asked, why is he not eating the meat? So he said he's a vegetarian. He says, and what's going on in the world of vegetation, he does know. In other words, of course, our answer will be, well, if we don't eat vegetables and we don't eat minerals, then we'll die. But so what? Just because you're going to die, that means that you have a right to disrupt the life of the mineral world or the vegetable world? The answer is, and this is the Torah answer, there's a story where one of the Hasidic Rebbes was walking with his son, and he was a little kid, and they were walking in the woods, like near a patch of shrubs, and the little boy tore off a leaf from the tree and began rubbing it like we commonly may do. And his father reprimanded him and said, what right do you have to tear off a leaf from a tree that was put there, and for sure for a particular purpose, just to rub it for no purpose? In other words, from a Torah point of view, going back to where I was leading to, everything in this universe is sacred, whether it's mineral, vegetable, animal, or man, or the human being. And the only right we have to touch any other part of the universe is only because we elevate it. The mystics would put it this way, that the apple on the tree, or the mineral, if you consume it, and you use the energy from that part of the world to help another human being, then they thank you. Because an apple on a tree or any other fruit in the world could not ever help another human being. Could not do anything to make this world a better place. It doesn't make the world a worse place, but it doesn't make the world a better place either. It keeps everything stable. As I said, there's a program. Nature is a program. So if the human being behaves like the crown jewel, then yes, then you have a right. You not only you have a right, you're given the right by the same God that created it all and gave it sanctity to elevate it to a greater place. But if you use it for selfish purposes, indulging in it, for your own purposes, then you don't have a right to touch anything in this world. Not animal, not vegetable, not mineral. That's the Torah view on life. And we don't even have the right to walk on the stones in the street because the stones didn't transgress. So this is what the Mishnah is saying, that our responsibility as humans is that we are responsible for the entire universe. We either destroy it or we make it better. And in that context, that's why a soul of a human is different than a soul of the other creatures of the world. This is not about pulling rank or trying to suggest superiority. It's about responsibility. The one who knows more, the one who has the ability to change the program has grave responsibility in both directions. Because we either destroy or we build. Now, of course, there's a neutral state where we do neither. That's another discussion whether that's possible. If you do nothing, is that possible? Well, it's not really so simple, because if you have to eat, you're consuming something from the world. Are you giving back as much as you're taking? That's the question. So to go back to our discussion, the two models of the human being really have its critical and far-reaching implications. According to the Torah model, there is no such thing as a circumstantial. Yes, you have a genetic makeup, but you know something? You have the ability to get beyond it. Certain things you can't change, but certain things you can. So yes, we may have predispositions. We all have hereditary traits. But when it comes to things of good and evil, there's no such thing as a human being born evil or a human being born good. Maimonides says that free will is fundamental. We could be born tall or short, into a wealthy family, into a poor family, with blue eyes, green eyes, brown eyes, or whatever. Different color hair, different race, different features, and so on. But when it comes to how you're going to use the opportunities that come your way, nobody predestined that. So the real issue here is, when it comes to sadness and happiness, is this an area that is up to free will, or is it an area that's up to the genes? Even if one were to argue that there is a genetic, there's a gene that may be a predisposition to sadness, which as I will continue here, would argue against. Even if one were to argue that doesn't mean it compels you. It just means maybe that's your challenge. Some people are born, let's say, with a personality that's more reflective. Reflective could also lead to become a brooder. A brooder can lead to someone who becomes very isolated. But you didn't begin that way. You have a predisposition. Usually intellectuals, people who are more thoughtful, are usually more isolated. People who are more emotional often need to feed that. They're more social. I don't want to suggest this as across the board. There's obviously exceptions. But there are personality types that lend themselves to certain features. But that doesn't necessarily write the script that you have to go down the road to destruction. It just means different people have different challenges and different strengths. Every personality has particular strengths. Now, we have to add into the equation, this is a critical component, is it even possible? And I would argue, as some sophisticated psychologists submit, that it's almost impossible to know many things about our lives, whether it's nurture versus nature. Because a young child is so impressionable that you can make the argument that due to the environment that the child grew up in and the attitude of his parents or her parents, and in its early formative years, that can rewire a child, and it should look almost as if it's born that way. We know this as a fact, that the neurons constantly can evolve. And for example, God forbid, stroke victims, it's clearly been demonstrated that new neurological paths can be developed, especially with therapy and so on. Now, yes, there are parts of the body that do not regenerate. God forbid, God forbid, a person loses a finger in an accident, it will not grow back. But especially on the cell structure and in the neurological structure, there's all kinds of changes that happen. So we know that there are things that can be rewired. There's no question about it. You see it with therapy, you see it in physical therapy, and so on. So to make a statement that we can tell whether something is purely genetic or, as they say, nurture versus nature is not a simple matter at all. The early impact of a child's life, and especially in pregnancy, how many things happen in pregnancy that may affect the child that are not genetic, is due to the mother's attitudes, the mother's behavior, even the mother's mood. How do these are areas of medicine and psychology that have not even yet begun to be explored. So bottom line is, it's almost impossible to really tell many, many features that are within us that are nurture versus nature. There are definitely things that you can isolate as being genetic and things that are clearly conditioned or acquired. But many, many areas are almost impossible to tell. The fact is, when it comes to children, that's why I made the point, the studies show, and I mean, I am not a scientist, I'm not going to say this as a scientific, but my own research and also observation of my own children. I've seen other children. Children in general are born cheerful and happy. And you need to do something specific to change that. There are exceptions. God forbid, there are children born handicapped too. There are children born without certain faculties or limited faculties. I'm not talking about an anomaly like that. I'm talking about the average child, generally born with in a happy state of mind. I've discussed this many times here. The reason for that is because the soul is naturally happy. As I told you, this is critical. If you go with an evolutionary Darwinian Freudian model, there's all kinds of theories. And there you can argue that maybe some people are born with a genetic sadness and some genetic happiness. If it's the soul, which is not bound by the program of nature, the soul is a natural happy entity. So here let's define happiness and sadness. In Hebrew, there are different words for simcha. Is more like joy. There's simcha, there's gila, there's... I'm not going to go through all the Hebrew words. It's not for here. Most of you don't speak Hebrew, so it won't be that significant. But what I'm saying is based on the Hebrew original meanings of these words. What is a state of sadness? How would one define sadness? So when you see the clinical description of sadness, and again, I'm distinguishing it from, I'm not talking about clinical depression now. I'm talking about clinical description. So sadness has symptoms. But the question is not just what are the symptoms, what is the state of being, the root of sadness. So the symptoms are pretty known. We'll travel from the symptoms to the root. The symptoms of sadness are, the symptoms of sadness include a feeling bad about yourself, not motivated. It's often associated with fear. It usually causes a person to be isolated and separate themselves. And there's a few other symptoms that I could describe. Obviously, there are different types of sadness. The sadness over the loss of a relative is one type of sadness. There's sadness, just an existential state of loneliness or sadness. So I'm not going to go through every particular type of sadness, but they all fit into a certain family that has certain impact on us as human beings. The way the Kabbalists and the mystics would describe sadness, they describe sadness as a state of disconnection. A disconnection. When you feel that you belong and you know exactly why you're here at this moment, there's a sense of seamlessness. That is a state of happiness, state of, let's call it wholesomeness, fulfillment. When you don't know where you are, you don't know why you're here, you like come into a room and you don't understand your place, you get confused, you get disoriented. And sadness is the epitome of a certain disconnection. That's the root of it, not the symptom, the root. Children, unless, again, something happens, if they're in an environment of love, and if a child coming out of its mother's womb after 9 months of being nurtured and fed, and basically 9 months, 24/7, being completely surrounded by protection of every possible way, if the child now, when it comes out of the mother's womb, is born and continues living in an environment like that, why should it feel disconnected? However, if a child is born into a home, for example, where the parents indicate early on that they don't want the child, God forbid. Or the parents are so consumed with their own problems, addictions, whatever it is that they're busy with, and they ignore and they do not nurture the child becomes disconnected, and that leads to sadness. Disconnection will lead to sadness. So if you think about it, the reason it's hard for us to identify is because when we find ourselves in a sad state, we're already there. We don't really know how to trace the steps. When did it begin? When's the first time you ever remember being sad in your life? You probably won't remember, because it happened probably at a time where your memory doesn't go back that far. But it's usually as a result of some type of disconnection. Now, a child, let's say, is home. I remember vividly in my own life. I'll give myself as an example. If you review all the classes, you'll be able to build a whole profile on me. Last week I talked about my 17-year-old stages. I'm going back to more like 4 years old. We have vague memories, but we remember ourselves usually. People remember from around 3 and on, you remember. My earliest memory, actually, if you really want to know, you're interested, is being taken to the doctor to take my tonsils out. That I remember. That was very young. But it was like a traumatic experience. They promised me ice cream. I remember it was a whole... And those days they gave you ether to put you under. Ether, which was very bad smell. They put it on your face, and then you just pass out. That I remember. Remember anybody here old enough to remember ether? Yeah? Okay. Well, what they call today anesthesia was ether. There's another ether. The scientists in the 19th century thought there was ether that surrounded the whole universe. It's another ether. The word ethereal comes from that. Anyway, yes, I had my first ethereal experience when they put me under to take out my tonsils. Let's put it that way. Well, a little later than that, I remember me and my sister, I'm the oldest of 5 children, and my sister and I, we were, I guess, maybe a little older, 5 years old. And my parents said they went out of the house. I remember it was raining, and they didn't come back so fast. Now, children, you don't even remember what means fast. It could have been 5 minutes, for all I know. But to us, it felt like hours and hours. I can't believe my parents would just leave us alone for that long. But I don't know why they went. They went, I think, it must have been something urgent. Anyway, but I remember me and my sister standing in the window, and suddenly we had this faith attack. Started praying to God to make sure our parents come back fast. That was the last time I was ever that desperate. But bottom line is, I remember it vividly. Now, I think back then we were completely hysterical, because children, you look at children, they don't think like we do. If a child gets up at night and is scared and says there's a monster in the room, you can't just rationalize and say there's no monster. You could even turn on the light, and the child won't necessarily be convinced. You just sometimes, instead of trying to rationalize, you just have to show your child that you're there. You love the child, you hold the child, you soothe it. You don't say, grow up and there's nothing here, Children think differently, whatever reason. And maybe it's for the best. They think differently. Maybe they're no natural. For them, when they're frightened, they just want to be held. And I'm not interested in you explain to them why they shouldn't be frightened. Maybe it reflects on something. I had an uncle, my mother's brother, who was killed, unfortunately, in a car accident years ago. So he was a little child. My grandmother told me that it was once in the middle of the night, it was a big thunderstorm, and started really thundering very loud. So he ran to his mother's bed, which is my grandmother. He's terrified. So his mother said, my grandmother told him, his name was Yosef Fitzi, he said, don't be scared. The only thing you should be scared of is God. Hashem, fine. He goes back to bed. Well, thunderstorms don't go away always that fast. And there goes another thunder. So she comes running back. She said, what now? He says, I'm afraid of God. So, before he called it thunder, now it's called God. So children think differently than we do. And as opposed to psychology of the go back to the psychology books, children's psychology of the 40s and the 50s, just 50 years ago, you'd be shocked to read how they looked at children. Children were seen as dumb and mute, actually. I think it was the Quakers. There was some remember the Quakers that defined children as being dumb and mute. Clean slate. They don't become, basically, think of it like an adult in the making. So whatever happens in a childhood's life is meaningless. Today is the exact opposite. that the biggest impact on a person's life is what happens in young childhood. Just for the record, just to show you Torah psychology's superiority, thousands of years ago, the whole Torah is based on children. Everything is about children. When God wanted a guarantor for the Torah, it was the children. During Purim, which is coming up, it was the children that Mordechai gathered to study with. Haman said he'll kill the children first. Pharaoh said throw the little boys into the river. I mean, throughout history, you'll see it was always the children. Passover Seder is about Ki yishal chavincha, your child will ask you. V'yigadah tolev, tell your child. The whole Haggadah, the word Haggadah means to relate a story. Comes from the verse, V'yigadah tolevincha, to tell your children the story. Because children were seeing the secret to the future, the key to the future, and children were what you teach them when they're young. It's a verse in the Proverbs. It says, teach a child when they're young, even when they get older, they will never waver from it. So the very ultra-Orthodox definition of that is brainwash them young. That way they can't, the rest of their lives they'll be guilty. But the real meaning of it is very simple. A child is impressionable, and if you educate a child with positive and the beautiful things when they're young, it will forever give them the strength to commit to a life like that. I guess everybody interprets it based on their own experiences. But you can definitely interpret it, what I just said is, to me, this is the natural interpretation. It's understanding of child mentality. Not about anything negative. So when it comes down to it, what you really have here is that the children are our most precious commodity, and therefore they play such a central role, and they're never just blank slate or dumb and mute, and nothing's happening. We have a custom when a newborn is born, you surround the child with prayers and holy words. You'll see many times at a door hanging a certain page that is, nobody knows what it says there, but it's something very mystical. The night of a bris. I mean, it's full of why are you surrounding a child with all these things? So again, in a very literal sense, don't say because you have Lilith, you have all these evil angels that want to kill the child or steal the child or whatever it is. That's it's a little superstitious type of description of it. The way I would define it is, a child is a precious soul sent by God to this earth, and a young, impressionable age, you want to surround it with holiness, because yes, there's a lot of negative energy in this world, and Lilith is not a physical shed or a demon that suddenly emerges. It's a negative form of energy, and children, like anything, why do you sterilize a room of surgery when you are, God forbid, you're performing an operation? Is because the internal organs are very sensitive, and you want to make sure that there's no disease and there's no infection around. That's what tumah in Hebrew, impurity doesn't mean physical impurity, it means a spiritual state of vulnerability, and that type of state like that, you want to surround a person with everything that's as holy as possible. That's why when the high priest went into the Holy of Holies, he prepared for 7 days, he was isolated, he went to the mikveh, he immersed himself, because when you're experiencing profound holiness, you have to be very, so to speak, sterilized or very protected from any negative type of blemish. The Yiddish comedian Jigan would say, there's the Yiddish theory of relativity. It goes like this: 3 hairs on the head are not much, but 3 hairs in the soup, that's the theory of relativity. So when you put a piece of dust on your finger, it means nothing. Put a piece of dust on a person's eye, it can be very irritating. Same dust, because it depends what the situation. If it's a very vulnerable, a very tender area, a little thing, a little blemish makes a major difference. Children are tender. They're tender souls that have not yet developed the callus and the veil, the artillery and the armor to protect themselves from this world, from this harsh world. So so the children particularly have to be surrounded in a holy environment. That's the meaning behind it all. All this to demonstrate how the Torah's model of psychology in children is highly sophisticated, goes back thousands of years, and psychology today is just beginning to catch up to understand some of these ideas. Now, the reason that many of us are not even aware of it, because we don't necessarily think or are taught to appreciate why the Torah puts so much emphasis on children and so on. It makes sense, of course, teach your children. That way the tradition will be passed on. Obviously, that's true. But it's a lot deeper than that. It's a lot deeper than that. It's because children have something that when you shape the seed properly, the tree grows into becoming a very powerful tree. When you contrast it with modern secular psychology, you can begin to appreciate some of these ideas that maybe we take for granted. So to go back to the theme of joy and happiness, children, therefore, the concept of sadness, they only would be sad if there's a disconnect. Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden. This is considered to be, even though they were created according to the Medrash as 20-year-olds, they were mature adults, or as mature as someone could be at 20, but they weren't babies. Yet their psychology, their psyches were like newborn children. That's why they were not ashamed of their sexuality. And they were naked, they were nude, and there was no problem. Why? Because sexuality was just another part of how God created them. Why should a newborn child be conscious of its sexuality? The only time a child becomes conscious is when it sees adults being conscious. And then when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, it says their eyes opened up, and suddenly they were ashamed. Even though shame is not exactly sadness, but it's the same type of idea. When you're a seamless force, and you know exactly, as I said, where you belong, and you feel that you're an extension, God put you here, and every part of you is part of a higher plan. Your eyes, your ears, your body, and yes, and also your sexuality. And you know exactly that you're here to serve a higher purpose. It's not about your own selfish needs. Then why should there be shame? Why should there be sadness? Why should there be anxiety? Every part of you has a purpose. What happened was when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, so there are different explanations given. It says, Eitz Hadas. They suddenly got das, knowledge of good and evil. The question is asked, what did they suddenly know? What did they not know before? Did they not know there's right and wrong? Obviously they must have known, because God told them, don't eat from this tree and eat from this tree. So clearly they knew there were choices. And they understood there were choices. They had to be seduced. The serpent came with a whole argument that you eat, God doesn't want you to eat from it because he doesn't want you to be like God. You know, the whole dialogue there. But the bottom line is, they knew that there was good and evil, and right and wrong. So what happened when they ate from the tree of knowledge? So as I said, there are different explanations. One of them, Maimonides gives in Meir Nevuchim, the Guide of Perplexed. There are other explanations as well. But a core one, and a very profound one, is, it's interesting, the word there says, Eitz Hadas, tree of knowledge of good and evil. In Hebrew, there's also Chachma and there's Bina. It doesn't say Eitz HaChachma, the tree of wisdom. It doesn't say Eitz Habina, or Havana, or Eitz Habina, which is the tree of understanding. It says knowledge, Das. Chachma and Bina, Das are not the same thing. Before they ate from the tree of knowledge, they had Chachma and Bina. They knew, they understood, and they had the wisdom of good and evil. The difference between Das and the other types of intellect, cognitive skills, Das is experiencing it. You know, someone can tell you, for example, that if you go through that door, I don't mean that door specifically, you go through a certain door, it's dangerous. You go in there, it's very dangerous. And you believe them, or you study and you see, yes, you see people who went through there, they got hurt. As much as you understand it, it's not you until you taste from it. You know, many of us, I'm sure, if you remember when you lost your innocence, however shape it took, it's a big difference by reading about the forbidden fruit and tasting it. And now in our minds, we could say, you know what, I know all about it. Like basically what the serpent said to them. You know, God said, he said to them, don't eat from it. So God said, don't touch it. You can touch it, nothing happens to you. So they misunderstood. So bottom line is, in our minds, we can distort and say, I read about it, people told me about it, I know it intimately, so what's the big thing? Let me try it once. Anyone that's ever crossed that path knows everything changes once you try it. Doesn't matter how experienced you are in your mind, as much as you read about it. You may be the biggest expert on a certain subject. As soon as you taste from it, as soon as you cross that line into action, it's called intimate knowledge now. Das is intimacy. It's not just reading about it. You can read about love, but experiencing it is a different story. And this goes both ways, in healthy things and unhealthy things. You can read about many beautiful things until you experience it. There's something that's missing. It has become part of you, who you are. And the same thing with the negative. I know many people who made that mistake. I would say most people have made. They think since they've observed it, they see it and all that, and they say, it hasn't affected me. What's the big thing? I'll try it once. But then everything changes. You can't go back. You can't say, no longer can you say, I'm a person that didn't try it. Now, some things are good to try, and that's healthy das. Some things are not so good to try. Adam and Eve were very brilliant. They understood very clearly there's right and wrong. Eat from this, don't eat from this. The mistake was that they went into the area of experiencing it. God also knows good and evil, but God does not experience evil. A true tzaddik knows also there's good. He's not naive. He knows what's right and wrong, but it's different once you taste it. And they tasted it. Once they tasted it, now they became disconnected from the source. As a result, they experienced themselves as a separate entity. Now their sexuality took on a whole life. And from there on, we have the garment industry. So they had to cover themselves. And they put on a garment, alei te'ena, the leaves of a fig. And that's that. So there you go. If you want to know where Fashion Week is now or something, right? That's where it all began. So then it wasn't so, fig leaf was the fashion. Then a lot of different fashions evolved since then. And now we're more consumed with the clothing than what's beneath the clothing. That's the new world. When once upon a time it was the other way around. The point being that there's a seamlessness that is the preemptive measure that counters any type of sadness. When you study really happy people, you'll find out there's no drug they take, there's no book they read that makes them happy, there's no particular thing they do. I think it was, who was it? It wasn't Henry James. I quoted it once in an article, I forgot who it was, some thinker. He put it very beautifully. He said that the pursuit of happiness, as soon as you pursue it, it will elude you. Because it's not a commodity that you can own. As soon as you stop thinking about finding happiness and you serve other people, happiness emerges in your life. You see, there are things in life that you can acquire, garments, for example. But there are things in life that are a state of being, what we call the difference between a noun and a verb. Is love, for example, a noun or a verb? So some would say for women it's a noun, for men it's a verb. Is it a state of being or is it an action? The truth is it's a state of being. We've so-called mastered it and turned it into a technique, into a verb, into an act as a verb. Now, of course, when you kiss someone, it's an expression of love, but love is not defined by a kiss. A kiss is a symptom of love, or a result, or a outgrowth of it. Love is a state of being. And love is 24/7. Even when you don't see the person you love, you still love that person. So clearly it's not defined by an action. It's not even defined by being in the presence of someone that you love. It's a state of being that's with you all the time. Someone says, I only love the person I love when I see that person. A little something wrong with that, So the same is true with happiness. Happiness is a state of being. It's not an action. But we live in a fast food society where everything is a commodity. So that's why you have half the best-selling books in the self-help section are about how to find happiness. One way or another, that's how it's worded. Now, what does that tell you? The fact that it's still on the bestseller list tells you that nobody's found happiness, or else why would they need another book? Think about that. So that means the more books that sell, I know you could say, well, undermines my writing of Toward a Meaningful Life, but I call it Meaningful Life, not Happy Life. So actually, that wasn't intentional, but the point of the matter is, I'm not suggesting these books don't have good ideas, and many of them resonate, and some of them are very good. But there's one thing that book cannot do for you. Even if it cannot give you the experience until you taste it in the right way. So if you really think about the word sadness, and it's hard to, when you're sad, it's hard to sit down and start analyzing what does it mean to be sad. You're feeling it. It is ultimately a form of detachment, a form of disconnect. That's bottom line what it comes out. It takes on the shape of sadness, but it really is a form of disconnect. And I think it could be understood the other way around, because when you feel connected, you usually don't feel sad. That's why sadness always is associated with loneliness. Why loneliness? Because it separates you. You feel like nobody can be with you in that place. No one can understand you, because only you are suffering. It makes you feel like nobody cares about you. Eicha Yashva Badat, since we're talking about Tisha B'Av, the opening verse in the book of Lamentations, which is connected to this month because it says Mishanichnas of Just as we diminish in joy in that sad month, here we add in joy. So you can learn a lot from you could say of is the epitome of sadness, and this month is the epitome of joy or happiness. So it says there, in the opening verse, Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, the prophet, when he bemoans and he sees the destruction of the first temple, he says, Eicha Yashva Badad, woe. That's how he opens up, Eicha, woe, or woe to me, that she sits alone. Of all the tragedy that troubled him most, he opens up Eicha not with the destruction of the Holy Temple, which was an unbelievable tragedy. The divine presence, the Holy of Holies. He doesn't talk about the death and the murder, slaughter of so many Jews in Jerusalem. He doesn't talk about the exile. I mean, later he talks about these things, but I mean the opening sentence, the exile, that from there on we would have to leave the land, our land. What bothers him is the loneliness of the city, because he's referring to Yoshva Bada, the Jerusalem, that she sits alone. What is the significance of this loneliness? Why loneliness, of all things? It seems almost like a trivial. It's like a secondary, after slaughter, after destruction, after exile. Yeah, loneliness is another additional, but that's how he opens up. So I remember I did a radio show in New York. I was a radio show host for a few years. And we had a show called The Thwart of Meaningful Life, actually. It was on WEVD every Sunday from 6 to 7. Remember that? The show went on for several years until, it was actually a very good slot. It was a call-in live show. And if you're ever interested in reading some interesting and entertaining transcripts, we transcribed them all, so they're all on our website. We also have recordings of them, but it was fascinating, really. Live call-in was excellent. It was a great time I had. So the reason I stopped it actually was because WEVD was bought by ESPN, and I wasn't willing to do sports announcing. So that's that. So I remember one show I did I was in Los Angeles that Sunday. Tisha B'Av, I think, was Monday. Or maybe was it Sunday? No, it wasn't Sunday, it was Monday. And so that Sunday I had to do it, and usually I went to the studio here, but you could do it also by phone. And I went to visit my good friend, Leonard Cohen, who was like maybe the godfather of loneliness and sadness, and L.A., and I told him I have to do the show. I said, why don't you come on the show with me? Talk a little about loneliness. It's a favorite topic of yours. Anyway, he says, it's going to be too complicated if I come. I need to run it by my agent, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, bottom line is he gave me a new poem that he says, here's a poem you can read that I'm giving you that has never been publicized before. So I read the poem. Anyway, I talked about this topic. That's how I remember the loneliness. And this issue about what bothered Jeremiah. What bothered him was, and it's interesting, Leonard Cohen wrote about it somewhat in his own words in the poem, was because the other factors were maybe greater tragedies, the destruction, the exile, the murder, and so on, but the psychological damage is worst of the loneliness. You could see this in people's lives. Every one of us, everyone should be protected, but people go through different challenges in their lives, losses, deaths of close ones, and so on, or whatever other experience we go through. Loss is something you can't stop. When time comes of a person, if our parent or someone has to go, that's it, you can't stop that. But the real psychological challenge happens what you feel like when you're in that type of state of being. And that is, you feel isolated, you feel you're alone. And the loneliness, I can speak from my own experience, personal and also speaking to others, when you feel alone, you don't feel there's any hope. I would submit, to the extent I would say, that if a person was able to feel that someone is with them, they would be able to endure anything. The challenge is not always the particular tragedy or the loss. It's the sense that you are all alone. God is not there with you. Your friends are not there with you. No one can reach you there because you're completely alone. And that is the saddest part of it. That you don't feel that you have any strength. You don't feel there's anyone there that cares. And that is the ultimate nature of sadness, that it's a sense of being separated from. I know it sounds, if you think about it, you think, you know what? If I was not sad, I would not be lonely. But it's not the truth. The truth is sadness is a result of loneliness, rather than the other way around. It's not that loneliness brings to sadness. Sadness brings to loneliness, which is why I think it was Nachman that said it. That someone said, you know, I can't sing because I'm not happy. They say you're not happy because you don't sing. That sometimes it requires triggering the state of being of natural happiness that's within someone by doing something. You see, if we are victims of circumstances, and it's a circumstantial thing, based on, as I said before, a model that we are pre-wired, then that's it. That's your situation, no way out of it. But if your soul remains pure inside of you, and your soul is always connected, except you don't feel it because you're disconnected from your own soul, then the solution is a whole different approach. Then the question is, the solution is, can you do things that access that part of yourself? Which is why, in a way, trust and faith is such a critical component in the whole picture. You can say, why do I need to have trust and faith in order to access joy? Because you need trust and faith in yourself and in your soul and in God who gave you that soul to reconnect when you feel disconnected. What other solution will there be? Because if not, we become basically a fatalistic situation. You know, something happens to you, you get isolated and sad and lonely, and there's no way back. What are you supposed to do? The only solution is either self-medication, numbing yourself to the point of being comfortably numb, as they say, or the solution is escapism, or just waiting for the pain to go away. There's nothing you can actually do. However, if you take the Torah model is you can do much. Your soul remains intact, doesn't matter whether you feel it or not. Just because you feel lonely doesn't mean you are. So the first step is to become a little more humble, and maybe what you feel right now is not really true. It's like you're blinding yourself based on your pain, and your loss and your sadness is blinding you. So you need to have something to hold on to. That's where faith and trust come into play. When you have faith and trust, you also believe that there's a God, and there's a God that gave you a soul, and that soul naturally is a happy entity, and that state of being is there somewhere locked inside of you, and it's a question of accessing it. Which is why we have a mitzvah to go ahead and be joyous. Because if not, how could you command someone who is naturally sad, or has real reasons to be sad? How could you tell them to change the state of being they're in? The answer is because it's not their only state of being. They have ability and the power and the free will to access another dimension inside of them. Now, I'm not saying it's suggesting that it's easy at all. You know, God forbid when a person sits shiva for the loss of a parent or of a close relative. So it says when it comes Shabbos, they don't sit shiva. On Shabbos, you're not supposed to be grieving and mourning. So something that always bothered me since I'm a child. A person, and I've seen it, lost a father, God forbid. Okay, and let's say on a Thursday. They sit Shiva on Friday, and Shabbos they're supposed to get up and go to shul, and no one says they have to make believe they're happy, but openly they're not supposed to be grieving. They're sitting at a Shabbos table. You don't have to add extra songs, but bottom line, the grief, the natural grief that they had on Friday, on Shabbos, they should be avoiding themselves any type of open grief. So what does this mean exactly? Is this a game? I mean, the death happened the day before. How could you suddenly switch off grief? Is it just a show to show you can't show grief to others, but inside you can grieve? What's the significance of it? What does it mean exactly? And on a very basic level, it seems odd. It seems like it feeds into the same stereotype that so many other things feed into, that religion is some type of programmed regulation that doesn't have anything to do with real emotions. A person just is lost somebody. How can you just tell them to switch it on, switch it off? You know. But here again, just like I said before about education of our children, you think about it, it's a little deeper than that. And if you really look in the sources and you look at the language, and I didn't want to bring up a negative thing, but it's important to emphasize, to see the significance. It doesn't say that because Shabbos came, the loss is not there. It doesn't say, right after Shabbos, you're supposed to continue sitting Shiva. Shabbos does not stop the Shiva. A holiday does, etc. But Shabbos is just that day you don't sit Shiva anymore. So what it's really saying is the same idea. For example, we don't put on tefillin on Shabbos. So I remember once this class years ago. So there was a period where, well, there's still periods like that, but there was a period where we had a whole group of more women coming to the class than men, and some of them were radical feminists. Let's put it that way. And they gave me this hard time about all these mitzvahs and trying to prove that Judaism discriminates against women. I'm not going to get into all that now because it's a very interesting topic, obviously, and we'll talk about it. But I just want to talk about one point. So one woman who seemed to be very knowledgeable, because she gave me the whole list of literally every discriminatory reference in the Torah, from the blessing in the morning to witnesses and judges and rabbis and aliyahs and mechitzas, everything. Okay, and of course tefillin too. Women don't put on tefillin. Tefillin is about bonding your mind and heart and connecting to God. So I was glad she brought up tefillin, because that was like my way to deal with it, at least for that moment. We like to say that whenever a dog comes into a Torah class, that it's a Gilgal, a reincarnation of some, like Bilam or somebody who wants to hear some Torah or something like that. So in case you see a dog walk in, don't get shocked. We don't discriminate here. Everybody's welcome. So tefillin. Okay, interesting, good. Seems right. Why do men put on tefillin, women don't put on tefillin? Never mind that women are bar mitzvah a year earlier than men, and which tells you something too, who's more mature. But that's another discussion as well. So I said, something? Let me ask you. Do you know when men put on tefillin? Yes. What days of the week? Every day of the week, but Shabbos. So I said, so let me ask you something. Shabbos should also feel discriminated against. That 6 days of the week you don't put on tefillin, and 7th day you suddenly put on, 6 days you put on, and one day, the holiest day of the week, doesn't have tefillin. Well, how would you answer if Shabbos asked you that question? Now, she was knowledgeable, but not that knowledgeable, so she didn't know the Talmud that answers the question. So obviously it was rhetorical. So I said, well, the Talmud says on Shabbos because a person should have 2 signs every day to remind them of God, and one of them is tefillin, and Shabbos itself is a sign, so Shabbos replaces tefillin. So it's not that Shabbos doesn't have tefillin. Shabbos is like tefillin. Tefillin is a reminder. It's a reminder in a world that we don't remember there's a God, and we have to constantly remind ourselves. You have to wonder why we only need 2 signs. We probably need 2 million signs. But let's suffice with 2. You need 2 witnesses, like a sign, a reminder, a signpost. And Shabbos is a signpost, so you don't need the tefillin. Now you could ask the question, why not have 3 witnesses, 3 signposts? Well, it doesn't hurt. No, because then it's like an insult to Shabbos, because Shabbos itself has the power. So because Shabbos has the power, in a sense it replaces the tefillin. So I said, why don't you understand that maybe a woman putting on tefillin, because she herself is a signpost, she's compared to Shabbos, and it's true, she's called Shabbos Queen. Anyway, this woman, she was stunned. She never thought of it that way, and I wasn't like I came up with a cute answer. This happens to be one of the reasons. Not that tefillin is some type of superior action, and only men have it. There are mitzvahs that women have. The point is, again, I'm not going into the whole discussion because there's obviously other issues as well. So in Judaism, when you think about it, the reason we don't say tachnun, for example, on Shabbos, tachnun is a certain type of confession or reminder of sin and so on, is because Shabbos accomplishes that which we tachnun accomplishes the rest of the week. Why don't we blow shofar on Shabbos? So there's technical reasons, but ultimately, how can we deprive ourselves from when Shabbos comes, Rosh Hashanah comes on Shabbos? Because Shabbos accomplishes that which shofar accomplishes. The same is true when it comes to the issue that I was discussing before with Shiva. What happens on Shabbos is not that you're supposed to forget your grief, which is what Torah can't regulate and tell a person, forget that your parent died yesterday, but remember the next day. It wouldn't be practical. You can't ask. The Torah does not ask people to do something that is unnatural, impossible. The Torah is saying, remember that even within your grief, there's a day that grieves for you. And Shabbos accomplishes what you were sitting Shiva. Shabbos accomplishes through Shabbos, through its own power. Ein otzav ba, it says. Shabbos does not accomplishes through joy, with joy, that which you accomplish on another day through crying. There was a man I remember who lost his wife tragically, second day of Sukkot. many years ago. The Rebbe told him, when he came and told him the news, the sad news, he said, "Oi, the Rebbe said in Yiddish, weißt es, als man darf jetzt weinen mit Simcha." Because when someone passes away on a holiday, you don't sit shiva, the holiday. So he says, apparently you have to cry through joy. You see, joy and tears, when you think about it, are a lot more sophisticated than just being sad or being happy. So again, it's not some type of one linear and one-dimensional experience. Sometimes you can cry deeply and have a lot of joy, and sometimes you can be very joyous and have a lot of sadness. It's a question of how you channel it and how you experience it. Life is a lot more complicated than just, as I said, one-dimensional. So to go back to the theme I was discussing here, what the Torah teaches us is that the domain of happiness is inside of you all the time. It's bottled inside of you. It doesn't matter how sad you feel. You could be in the throes of the worst disaster. There's still happiness in your soul because your soul is connected. The question is whether you're connected to your soul or not. Now, there are times where it's appropriate. Talking about Shiva, it says, a person cannot say, I just believe in God and I don't even want to grieve. That's considered to be cruel. There's a time where we do have to recognize and acknowledge and grieve because we're disconnected. There's nothing wrong with being disconnected at times. But to remain and think that that's your final domain, that's your resting place, that is absolutely unacceptable. And that's why Jews have survived it all. Because they knew how to cry well. It's not like they didn't know how to cry. We know how to cry. But they didn't say, it's like being difference between someone that says, I suffered. That doesn't mean I'm a sufferer. Just because I cried doesn't mean I'm a crier. Jews knew that there's a stage you go through crying, but then ultimately you have to learn how to build. And we may never understand some of the pain in our lives and the sadness, but we don't become shaped by it. You don't become defined. You never become a victim. Because you always know that the soul and his domain is connected. So Adam and Eve cried probably plenty after being expelled from the Garden of Eden. How could they not have? They saw what happened. They saw what they did. And there was no way back. But at the same time, they rebuilt the world as well. It was not a world as it was before, but they built. And we're still here to tell about it. So what you have is really, the interesting element is that when Purim comes and this month comes, it's not about regulating and saying, listen, turn on a switch and become happy. It's telling you, maybe you don't see the whole picture. Maybe there's a lot more than meets the eye, which really is the story of Purim. If you were living at the time when all this happened, the story of Purim, it took around 7 to 9 years to evolve. From the time where the Megillah begins, that Achashverosh ruled over 127 provinces, and then through a party and the whole ensuing events, till the end of the story is 7 to 9 years. So, and we read it within a span of 20 minutes. And if you lived at the time, 7, 9 years is a long time. You would probably not connect the dots. Here there's a king, he throws a party. Okay, fine. He invites the Jews to the party. Then he invites his wife. She doesn't want to come. He has her killed. Then he starts looking for a new wife, and it happens to be Esther. Then Mordechai ends up happening to overhear a plot against the king. And Haman then plots to kill the Jews because Mordechai won't bow to him. And then the king happens to have one night of insomnia. He can't sleep. We all have insomnia. It's a big thing. And because of that, they read to him the story, and he wants to reward Mordechai. If you look at the story, when it's connected, it leads up to great ending. But if you're living through it 7 to 9 years, you could say a bunch of random events, and you have no clue that one leads to the next. And then it happens to be Esther's at the right time, the right place. The king happens to can't sleep that night. They happen to read to him this story, and all the other elements. It teaches you that Purim is a hidden hand that we don't see. Right now in our lifetimes, right now, you may be going through a difficult time. What do you think you'll be 7 years from now? Do you recognize the dots right now of what's coming to become the seeds of salvation? Because we see things narrow, myopic vision. You only see the moment. You don't see the picture. Which is one of the reasons that God's name is not mentioned anywhere in the whole Megillah, because God's hand is hidden, but it's there. It's concealed. In some verses it's alluded to. You don't see the revealed divine hashgacha till in retrospect. When you see the story, you start seeing it all, how did it all come together, and it all worked and it saved them from total extermination. So the lesson to us is the same thing, that Purim is not just about a day of salvation. As I said at the beginning of the class, Purim is the only holiday that transforms the entire month. HaChedesh HaShenepach Lahem, Miyagin L'Simcha, it transforms an entire month. Even Passover doesn't do that. Yes, from the beginning of Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we don't say Tachanun and other things, but it doesn't say the whole month is a month of joy necessarily. It's a month of Geula. At Purim, it actually says, and there are halachas, there are laws that are relevant to the first day of Adar, involving court cases, involving simchas, making simchas and celebrations, that the entire month becomes a month of joy. Because Purim's story is not just of one day when we were saved. It's a story about how to look at life. That although that life is many, many dots that don't seem connected, but there's always, within it all, there's a bottled, stored amount of soul or happiness or joy inside of a human being. It's not something we have to create. It's not something we have to manufacture. It's about accessing it. And Purim teaches you can access it even in the most difficult times. So yes, there's a time to be sad and there's a time to be happy. Even today we fast the day before Purim. This year it'll be Thursday because Purim is on a Sunday, so you don't fast on a Shabbos, for the same reason I said before. So it's on Thursday. So we still remember that there's a sad element to this as well. But ultimately, even the sadness leads to, as I said, that tears are like water, like raindrops, and they sow the fields, and things grow out of it. So the end of the story is that the question, are we wired to be sad? My answer would be no, we're not. Because the soul cannot be wired to be sad. The soul by nature is a state of being of happiness. Could it be that our bodies have certain genetic elements from our parents? I would argue against that. I would say it's probably mostly as a result of circumstances. Circumstances, even from young childhood. You grow up in a home that is sad, most likely you're going to have a lot of sadness in your life. When you see people who carry a lot on their shoulders, it's not necessarily because they were born with it. It may feel like that way, but you grow up in a home, whether let's say Holocaust survivors or others that have grown up in very sad lives and feel sad, how could it not affect the children that grow up in such an environment? That doesn't necessarily mean, however, that that's who you are. It just means that's where you grew up in. The question is, can you access something that's deeper than that? I'm not suggesting it's easy, but at least there's a ray of hope to know that you are not a product of your environment. You could choose to transcend it, which goes back to what I said earlier, that the soul of a human is different than all of creatures. You have the ability to go out of the program, even if you have a program that somewhat affected you, which really explains even why even children who may have grown up in the most difficult circumstances are not necessarily trapped there. And I've seen it with my own eyes. I could bear witness that I've seen people growing up in the most difficult homes possible that you can imagine and have made it, have learned to grow through it. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm even saying their lives are easy today, but they have transcended. That doesn't mean they don't have sadness. It doesn't mean they don't remember. It's not escapism. It's a process. Robert Frost put it, that the only way out is through. They went through. They made it through the burning building, and they came out stronger. And they are extremely refined, and they help refine others. So I've seen it, so no one can tell me it's not possible. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. You need friends, you need support, and you need, above all, real confidence and trust in something greater than yourself. Because obviously your own circumstances shape your mind. So you have to have the humility to say that it's not, I don't have it all figured out. There may be a bigger picture. So Purim reminds us there's a bigger picture. And I'm sure there were many people living in Persia, in the Persian Empire at the time, that gave up complete hope. How could they not? The letters and the decree passed on throughout the whole country. Even after Haman was killed, the decree was everywhere. There was no email then and no Facebook to say that Achashverosh recanted and abolished the decree. He had to go and find and send out another set of letters and stuff like that. So there were very good reasons to believe that there would be a total Holocaust. And yet, it was not. So it's important not to come to conclusions, to jump to conclusions. Now, we should never have to hear about negative things. We should all be in positive context. But I want to say in our personal lives, we all have that microcosm of the story We have our ups and downs in our lives. And remember, the dots, to connect them is not so easy. So don't draw any conclusions yet. Sometimes, and I speak also for myself, sometimes you're on a road and you have no idea where it's going to turn. And then it turns in a place that you wouldn't expect. Surprises happen that are good surprises. And not necessarily always open miracles. Sometimes it's seeing it through. You have to not give up. You see it through. You keep riding, and the storm subsides, and the sun comes out from the clouds, and there's a new horizon, a new morning rises. So, since I see so much happiness in this room, and all of your souls shining out forward, see, look at that smile, despite yourselves, I hope you can carry and hold on to that spirit. And remember, it's in you all the time, when you're sleeping, when you're awake. Sometimes actually when you're asleep, it may be better than when you're awake, because at least you don't get in your own way, So, but it's important to put yourself to sleep with good thoughts, and not just read the new depressing news, or the TV or whatever it may be, that just reminds you of how difficult life is. It's good to travel with your mind, with your heart, to other places, and let your sleep be a little peaceful. And then it'll help you also access the inner joy that we all, that is our birthright, that is inside your soul all the time. So remember, you have to remember, one, that you have a soul, whether you believe it or whether you like it or not. And number two, that your soul is a happy being all the time. And that's the key thing to access. So, I feel happier already by just sharing this. And of course, it's not just about meditating, it's about doing things. As I said, serving. You help other people, not focus on yourself. You help other people, it always helps access that part of your soul. So we will continue this class next week. There will be some change of schedule because I'm going to be traveling at the end of this month to Sydney, Australia. But I'll let you know about that. And everyone should have a very, as I said, joyful, joyous, happy week, month of Adar. Every day, Ma'alim B'Kodesh, we increase in joy, even more in joy. And please see myself, Velvel, who just entered the Meaningful Life Center, as a source of joy in your lives, and I hope you're a source of joy in our lives. And we shall, partnership, help hopefully tip the scale and bring a little more happiness that overshadows the darkness. So thank you very much. And again, the class dedicated to memory of Levi ben Yehuda and Batsheva, and Refuah Shleima for Miriam Bat Zipporah. And if you haven't left us your email address, please do. And also, please share with any of your friends, because not everyone knows about this new location. So in case anybody asks, or even if they don't ask, let them know. And what else can I say? Okay. So Philip gives a class tomorrow night, 7 p.m. And if you need information, ask Velvel or email us or call us. We're accessible. So everyone have a great week and a great night. Thank you very much.
Scattamo stanotti, viri come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Gira musica, gira e non si ferma, come una galla do vento aita. Attira con narina, tamburello e abbacia come sua figliola. Scattamo stanotti, viri come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Sinni e Tunu, i voti si danno, tu na poco gli peputia. Sindaff e Tunu, i cappotti russi e si ricordano da notti buona. Scattamo stanotte, vieni come balla, su te fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotte, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Ballamo stanotte, viri come ballo giugiu, viri come balla nanna. Ballamo stanotte, viri come balla nonna, viri come balla zia. Ballamo stanotte, viri come ballo giugiu, viri come balla nanna. Ballamo stanotte, viri come balla nonna, viri come balla